We've got a couple things on our agenda today. We've now got a quorum, which we didn't have last week, or last month, so I'm very pleased we had enough people show up for a quorum today. So I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time. First item on the agenda is to approve the December 11th agenda. I move that we approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Next item is to approve the October 9th minutes. I move that we approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Director's report.
Have a update on the bike counts from Tricia Thomas.
Hello. Normally I give this presentation to the Transportation Advisory Committee, but I thought since I made such a big deal about volunteering this year, I would give you an update on the results of the count. So it's going to be pretty quick. But you may remember back in September on the 20th and the 22nd, we went out and counted at 35 different sites. We had over 50 volunteers help us, and thank you to all those who did help us. The methodology that we use for this bicycle and pedestrian count, it's a manual count. It comes from the National Bicycle and Pedestrian Documentation Project. And we use it because it's applicable to all different sizes of communities and places. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the methodology, we're basically out there counting three categories of people, bicyclists and pedestrians, and then this other category, people on rollerblades and segways, that sort of thing, anybody who's not driving a car, basically. And so when we looked at the data, 80% of the traffic was counted on Saturday, which was the 22nd. And these are the top 10 sites. So it looks like the Ark River Path at the Keeper had about 873 people go by. And that guy was really busy because he's counting both sides of the river over there. So he does it there every year. It's his favorite site. So they were really busy this year. And it looks like we had a couple non-Wichita ones, which normally the high counts are in Wichita, but we had that Mulvane site down there at number 8 and Goddard number 6. So the total number of people were just over 2,500. It looks like the majority were pedestrians this year. And this is a tricky number Chris helps me with, but he laughs because we debate this every year. But in 2012 and 2018, there were the same 26 sites counted for both year, and between those years, there was an 80% increase. So hopefully I didn't say that too confusing. And then the same type of comparison among the 12 sites that were counted in 2017 and 2018, there was a 66% increase. And this is just the distribution between both years by category. And then the last thing I wanted to share was, you may remember a couple years ago, we started working on this mobile application. It's been a bumpy road. We're still working on it, but we were able to successfully use it and roll it out. It was kind of in the beta test phase last year, but we're really excited. This is a paperless way for our volunteers to capture the data. They can upload pictures and comments also. So this also works for Walktober and Open Streets Wichita. So keep your eye out for this next fall as we start gearing up for those things. And for those of you who missed out on being a volunteer this year, mark your calendars. The 19th and the 21st, I'll be hunting people down to count again. Questions? Comments? Okay.
Also wanted to give you a kind of a brief update on what we're doing for year-end funds. As you know, the last couple of years, we weren't able to carry over our year-end balances, and we kind of had to scramble to come up with projects. We did the planning walkable places one year, and this year we committed the majority of the funding to the South Meridian Bridge project, and also are doing some ITS work with the remainder of the funds. What we'd like to do in the future is look at breaking down in the funds into various accounts that would give you a little flexibility, and also to give you an idea on a regular basis how much funds are available over the course of the year rather than waiting till the end of the year to do so. But to give you a little more flexibility if you've got a project that needs to be moved up and we can get through the development process. We'd like to take care of that and give you more opportunities to use the funding rather than to wait until the last second. So we should be coming to you probably in the first couple, 3 months of this year with some ideas and for your consideration. I just wanted to give you an update on that.
Good. Any questions? Okay. Next item on the agenda is our consent agenda. I move that we approve the consent agenda. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion over the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Next item is public comment opportunity. Jane, you want to speak this morning or this afternoon?
I can come back in the morning if you want. I'm happy to follow Tricia's report on biking and walking kind of exploding. Is that fair to say 60%, 80% increases? And I'm happy to follow Phil Nelson's report about walkable places. In fact, I see that all over. Of course, my eye is kind of peeled for that. The article I have in front of me that I saw read this morning said that again and again, when we look at streets oriented toward people, that is, streets where walking is safe and enjoyable, that people are drawn to visit on foot, and where fast and extensive car traffic is not the number one priority, we find that they are more economically productive than any other style of development. Walkable streets encourage business activity, generate greater tax revenue per acre, and offer a higher return on investment than auto-oriented streets. Maybe you all are tired of hearing me talk about, how healthy walkable areas are. I just thought I'd vary that message just a little bit to take a look at the economic productivity of walkable streets, not only downtown, which is wonderful, but in neighborhoods as well. Are there any questions? Thank you.
I should have had you state your name for the record.
Oh, I beg your pardon. My name is Jane Burns. Thank you.
We know you, but didn't know if we needed to do that for a record. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on the public comment portion today? Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion. Next item is new business. First item is a coordinated plan update.
It's me again. So, we have been working on this coordinated plan since last summer. You've seen many versions of it and the executive summary. And so today we're here to act on it. And I was just going to do kind of a brief summary of what this plan is, what's in it, what we heard when we went out on the streets and talked about it, and then what's up next. So, our last update was in 2013. And that plan was focused on our coordinated transit district, which is number 9 right now, and that was multiple counties. This year, Kansas Department of Transportation has decided to work across the state and address some of the rural areas. So we're basically taking care of that donut hole. We're doing the Wichita urbanized area. So our plan will focus on the areas in that map, Wichita and the surrounding little cities around there. And this tool serves as a coordinating tool for basically paratransit for older adults and people with disabilities, transportation. So just stole my own thunder right there. And low-income households. The four major sections based on FTA requirements are an assessment of the services and the transportation needs, strategies to identify any identified gaps and barriers, and then recommendations. And I will throw in a fifth area that's not listed in the FTA requirements explicitly, but we also include our Section 5310 program funding scoring criteria. And this is the enhanced mobility for older adults and people with disabilities funding. So when we looked at our list of available services and made the required updates, this is the breakdown of what we found. 68% of the services are provided by for-profit entities. So these are cab companies and other companies that are private, for-profit, followed by the private nonprofits at 18%. When we we take that slice, that public, that 14% public slice, and broke that up. This is what we saw. Wichita Transit is serving 17% of the communities in the urbanized area. And then Butler County Transit and Derby Dash, and then the largest share was Sedgwick County Transportation at 67% of the communities. I did have a comment that it might be interesting to see population, number of people served, but this is just communities. So I'm happy to share any more details if anybody has those questions. And then these were the identified needs. So this will look familiar to you. The last time I talked to you, I shared that whole list of public comments that we received and those theme areas. This pie chart was reflective of those theme areas: issues for seniors and quality of place issues, accessibility, whether it's a physical environment or the cost. Those sorts of things are all captured in these theme areas. And this eventually helped inform the goals of the plan. So some of the strategies that came out of the work, and I wanted to say a thank you to all those who helped contribute to this. We had a steering committee that worked on all of this. Our last plan had, I think, 20 strategies, and it was very cumbersome, so we tried to wrap them up here in a package. The first one is removing barriers that make transportation prohibitive. A lot of those accessibility type things are itemized in the plan. And then transportation system collaboration. That's with both providers and other community partners. And then a provision of mobility management, basically understanding what the needs, identifying the gaps, and developing solutions. And then our recommendation, we've had some updates. You probably saw that late night email that reminded you to come to this meeting. We also added in the update to our summary. Thanks, Phil Nelson, for your help with that, and others who gave feedback, because we got a couple of comments that came in late that said we needed to develop that a little more. So this is what we've come up with. So we brought forward 2013 recommendation. This is really general, talking about designated recipients, ensuring proper and responsible use of funds, and that mandatory rides are being given. And then the same idea that came from the strategies of institutionalizing the centralized mobility management and coordination speaks to those strategies that I just talked about. And then developing an effort among transportation providers, basically efficiency, cost of effectiveness, and then accessibility, all built into this last recommendation. I printed a copy of the executive summary. In that, you'll see that these recommendations are elaborated more with specific examples of what's next too. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. I know I'm kind of blazing through this. Then that fifth thing that I told you about, the 5310 scoring. So that's what this is. Basically, we have a 100-point scale, and they're split up between these four areas: demonstration of need, that accessibility and collaboration, meeting the specific needs of the population, and then the coordinated transit district participation. So this is the need to collaborate in the community with other providers. And questions?
I have a question. So this scoring, is this, who does the scoring on the 5310?
Wampo does the competitive selection for the 5310 applicants, but Wichita Transit is the designated recipient. So we make a recommendation to them, and then they take it from there.
Okay. It seems like, I just want, so Wampo staff does the scoring?
No, I staff the selection committee. Last year it was made up of community partners, somebody from AARP. I tried to get representatives from the fields, like from the aging field and the field of disabilities. There's someone from the, I always get this wrong, the KDR, the Kansas Disability Rights Center. We had a parent guardian, a case manager,
Okay.
got someone from
So does
senior
the total
services.
score, does that affect the 5310 funding? If you get, okay.
And we did work in collaboration with Wichita Transit to develop these scores, and they were on the steering committee.
I have a question. So what happens now? What do we do now with it after?
So that's my next slide. Good question. So we're requesting that you all consider this update to the plan. If approved, we will work to coordinate with the statewide plan to make sure both of our plans make sense and work together for the region. And then I'm hoping shortly thereafter we can release the 5310 program call for projects. So we have a short timeline. We want to give the nonprofits and other applicants plenty of time to make application. And so that will be next. And then we're hoping to do project selection in early 2019 and pass everything over to Wichita Transit to implement whatever projects are selected and funded. And then that last bullet is, I'm hoping that we don't lose all the comments and everything that we learned. So I want to find a way to bring that forward as we're updating our long-range plan also, so that it continues in some way, if not just as information to help, craft that plan.
Tricia, if the body is not comfortable with the recommendations since they saw them so late, can they delay action on the recommendations but approve the scoring rubric?
That would be ideal. Then the 5310 timeline would not be impacted, and then we would have time to make whatever changes we wanted to.
Any further questions? Well, I guess my first question is everyone comfortable with the plan, first of all? And if not, then we have to move to a next step. But anyone wish to make a motion that we approve the plan?
I'll make a motion to approve the plan.
A motion to approve the plan? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that?
And that includes the recommendations, the whole thing, right? Is that what we're looking at?
Uh-huh. Any questions before we vote on that? I see no questions. Then All in favor of approving the plan, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. You got a plan.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda, we've got Keith Lawley in here to talk about our planning scenario. Keith, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, policy body members. Keith Loyne with the Workforce Alliance of South Central Kansas and also the Senior Administrator for the Regional Economic Area Partnership. My pleasure to be here with you today. Technical question, does this advance my slides? Oh, underneath, okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm pleased to be here to represent the Scenario Planning Work Group. I had the honor of chairing that. We put that together a little over a year ago when Gloria Jeff was here. This was under her direction from staff perspective. Phil has taken that over. But the first thing, and this is going to be off the slides, I think this from scenario planning we should consider is more parking out here. I don't know if that's Jim Weber or Commissioner Howell, but I don't know if that's a Wampo approved project, but I do apologize, but thought I would bring it up. So the scenario planning work group, we've developed various scenarios for developing possible changes to transportation planning processes for you all to consider when you put together the next metropolitan transportation plan. We looked at multiple different scenarios. We kind of came down to 5 different scenarios, but you know, when you get this assignment, it's a little bit subjective. You know, you're looking at all sorts of factors and political considerations as to what may or may not happen. How do we advise you all as a policy body? It was a good mix of, I would call it a nice think tank, because we had a group of academics, we had some policy experts. Let me see if I can pull them up here. Sam Brown, who was the chair at Hugo Wall School, Dr. Brown was with us, Councilmember Claycomb, Councilmember Clendenin. We had Russell Fox, Dr. Russell Fox from Friends University, Jim Weber, one of our technical support folks, John Prather, Paul Gunzelman, Mike Moriarty, and Michael Tan is not listed. He was not here when we started the scenario planning group, but Michael came and joined the festivities with us and was a very valuable member of our think tank. But again, like I said, we're trying to look at different scenarios, different recommendations to bring to you all as a policy body to consider how to invest the resources that you have at your disposal. And so we came up with, you know, the basic, you know, maintain the current system. Second was look at issues related to urban renaissance. A lot of the downtown development that's been going on, certainly in this community, but in other communities throughout the area. An idea for more walking spaces, for more bike paths, just things that are happening in urban neighborhoods that have been going on consistently. Looking specifically at a local transportation investment. Traditionally funding for transportation projects, certainly the dollars we work with here at Wampo, that may change. What are the opportunities or what are the scenarios that we need to think about in terms of new funding models for transportation projects? Looking at repurposing existing infrastructure. Again, I think it's somewhat tied to scenario 2, but when you've had communities that have changed from what was planned and what was invested in the 40s, 50s, or 60s, and how relevant is that infrastructure now? Is it still serving the same traffic counts and things like that? So again, something to take into account. And then last, transportation technology, certainly driverless vehicles, other smart technology that you all have been addressing for a while and considering. That's certainly a factor in scenario planning. So in the, excuse me, let's go back here, sorry. Continue to invest in preservation and maintenance of existing infrastructure. This is the representative scenario. Again, thinking about vehicles continuing to be the primary movers of people, goods, and services for the near future. Determine appropriate functional classifications for streets based on land use, potential changes, investments, and looking at how those streets will remain the same or not so. And invest in safe, walkable infrastructure that enhances quality of place. Some policy considerations there. Again, thinking about the inevitability of changes in the way infrastructure is financed. There's been a lot of talk at the federal level about redoing some financial partnerships, redoing investments in transportation projects. We certainly have been through a lot of turbulation, I would say, in state funding of highway projects the last few years. So again, what does that mean for you, not only as members of the Wampo transportation body, but as members of your local governments that have to invest in transportation projects? Again, like I said, those funding scenarios are more uncertain, and the region, could and should come together to develop a concerted voice on some of these transportation issues that certainly have an impact that transcend political boundaries. And looking at the probability that major capital improvements must have a growing local financial commitment. Again, I'm kind of leading up to that inevitability and some of the things that we have been thinking about in our work group as we try to forecast scenarios. Other policy considerations, again, along this regional approach would be some kind of way to fund local dollars to improve infrastructure that can increase the economic mobility and accessibility of our transportation systems. Develop a top-down priority funding structure for financing the various transportation elements, such as road, bridges, active transportation projects, projects that promote economic revenue enhancements, such as freight, smart technology, and regional transit that can get people to work or to other service needs. And invest in infrastructure and equipment that provides the highest return on that investment. That's, again, I think something we've been hearing from the Department of Transportation at a state level, a real focus on guiding investments and projects that really do impact the economy and do get a return on that investment. So again, scenario planning. This is like scenario planning 101. Prepare for the inevitability of change. I mean, that's, again, something that we had a lot of very great conversations with at our planning group, but again, very subjective. It's really hard to nail that down, and I do want to compliment the Wampo staff, Phil and Tricia and his crew, Chris. They did a great job of bringing in some technical experts for the committee. We saw a lot of best practices and examples from other areas. So again, I think it really helped form what we're coming up with today and our recommendations. Again, thinking about repurposing streets that have excess capacity, possibility to accommodate other transportation uses. We talked a lot about George Washington Boulevard, Southwest Boulevard, some of those roads that were built, and there was a different economic model here in the Wichita area. Track the development of autonomous vehicles. Bus rapid transit systems, personal rapid transit, plans change to accommodate additional technology advancements. They've got an electric car filling station at Town East Square now. I mean, so how many more of those are we going to be seeing, are we going to be needing? Or is that something that is still a long way off for us here in the Wichita area? And then again, looking at non-fossil fuels, can impact air quality standards. Another issue that we have had to deal with in this region for some time, and I think you'll be hearing an update from Chris later on in your agenda. Determine what changes in the transportation choices will create in terms of network capacity. Again, going back to some of the discussion about options for transit, how do we get enhanced public transportation services? How do we look at other ways to move people around? Certainly something you'll all be considering when you think about investments with our federal dollars we have. Determine new transit standards that offer the greatest mobility to those most in need of the service. We certainly are an aging population, and many of us will be actively seeking alternative transportation options as we continue to get older. Again, how does that impact a system overall and the investments we make? Look at the ancillary changes that could create in zoning and subdivision regulations. We've talked about, urban sprawl for a long time. We're building roads to new developments. Is that really the best use of the transportation funds? Or again, going back to that urban renaissance, are there infrastructure changes that could be made? Are there neighborhoods that could be revitalized as opposed to building on the outskirts? And what impact does that have on transportation investments? Looking at levels of community engagement, what is the transportation needs? How do we rethink those? How do we respond to what the constituents and the taxpayers are saying? And how do we base capital investments on meeting those needs? And really thinking about land development philosophies, again, I've kind of talked about this at the previous bullet, to induce development that best be served for existing infrastructure. I know the city of Wichita is taking some steps right now to look at some infill projects and internal development. Again, we think that needs to be a part for the transportation or the policy body to think about as they invest transportation resources. And I think this is another key one, and it's consistent with other policy guidance that we hear agencies are going, but how do we look at those infrastructure enhancements that are changing land use patterns? How are those paid by development choices? Is that toll roads? Are we thinking about that? Is that something you all might be considering in terms of accessing transportation needs? How do we pay for that kind of development? And how does that coincide with investments that you all have to make? And looking at changes in demographics, again, like we've been talking about previously, some of the other bullets, aging population, different transportation needs or desires by a younger population coming up than maybe previous generations. So again, what does that have impact on our decisions? Looking at how change can be made revenue neutral or can provide presentation and maintenance capital. The use of elements in different scenarios would be one of the elements used to build the next metropolitan transportation plan. And so what we're asking today for consideration or discussion at least is for you all to provide some kind of guidance as to whether to incorporate the representative scenario as one of the elements to build the next MTP. And when we say the representative scenario, it's really combining the 5 scenarios that we looked at and examining the policy impacts and the decisions. When we were looking at various scenarios, what we were starting to do as a work group was trying to select a scenario. Is it maintenance of the and preserve the existing system? Is it injecting technology into planning? But we couldn't really come up with a scenario that made sense to recommend to you all. So this is what we are looking at as a representative scenario. And I don't know how much guidance this is actually giving you. I mean, I think as all of you are members of this body, certainly are thinking about a lot of these issues, but I don't think you all have time as a body maybe to go into the level of detail that we were able to do at our work group. And so I don't know if the conclusions any of you would have had, if you've been part of this, would have been different, but this is what we have come up with. I do want to thank the members who were very committed, who came to the meetings over the last year. Like I said, this was a rather subjective assignment, and I think we grappled with what the right answer would be. And I think the best answer we could give you is there's a whole lot to think about as you move forward in transportation planning. And the best scenarios are ones where we are looking at technology, we're looking at the changing demographics, and we're also focusing on maintaining existing infrastructure as much as possible. So I will respond to any questions, or I would actually recognize the individuals who are here who were part of the work group, Councilmember Clendenin, Councilmember Claycomb, Mr. Weber. I don't know if you have any comments or want to add anything to my presentation. Well, I will answer any questions. You've all have made this very easy. Or Phil will help me answer some questions, or Chris will. But again, I would like to generate at least some level of discussion. This is a lot to think about, and we would certainly, I think, members of the planning work group, while we're anxious to have the assignment over, we want to make sure we get it right. And so, if you want us to involve or give us more of an assignment and send us back to come up with something more specific. If you want to, again, meet with us at the executive committee or an individual level, we'd be happy to continue any of these conversations. Yes, Tom.
I've just got a comment, and Phil can straighten me out if I'm off track here a little bit. But at the last TAC meeting, we did an exercise on the next, like the 2040 plan. We were looking at what future scenarios might be, and we had broke up into like 4 different groups and came up with a list. And that probably tags back into, so we are doing something thinking that way.
And yeah, no, Tom, you're right. And I think what we're really wanting today, and again, if not today, at least start a process. We want the policy body to bless this moving forward, so the TAC can continue to develop some of that work as an advisory body to this group. And so staff has an idea, and certainly our partners at Wichita Transit have an idea of the direction the policy body wants to go.
I just want to let your team know that we've done that on a one meeting scenario, and I don't think it's done. I think eventually it'll probably be this group, right? Right. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. Was that are you making the statement to Phil, or you?
Either as an exercise or an end item. I don't know which way.
Probably in a workshop type setting.
Yeah,
Right.
I would.
Okay.
And again, I think members of the planning work group would be happy to engage in a workshop with the policy body. I know obviously a couple of members here serve on that, but I'm sure Dr. Fox, Mr. Prather, and others would be willing to come back and chat with the policy body. Again, like I said, it was an opportunity for us to really dig down and deep into some issues. I think something that you all don't really have a chance to do in the couple hours you get to spend here at these meetings or in the related activities of Wampo.
Keith, I think it would be good to point out that, so we spent a lot of time gathering data from a lot of groups to put these scenarios together. So it wasn't just the committee sitting in a room making these up.
No, and we have, and I don't know what's been presented to the policy body, but we have, as Councilmember Claycomb says, extensive data and scenarios that go into great detail. And again, if that would be helpful to provide the policy body members, happy to do that. But the idea of picking one of those 5 scenarios and saying, this is it. So what we did was really lifted elements from each of those various scenarios to make this representative scenario. But yeah, it was quite a labor of love, I would say. I mean, I do appreciate the commitment that the members brought to it. And again, like I mentioned, staff did a nice job of providing us a lot of technical support.
Keith, how many groups do you think we were in front of? Do you have that?
How many curves do we think?
No, how many groups were we in front
Oh
of?
my gosh. Oh, thank you for asking. We really, in the spring of this last year, we went to a lot of neighborhood groups. We did a lot of survey work. We went to a lot of community organizations. I know we went out and met with the Sedgwick County Association of Cities. We got some input there. We did go to the Regional Economic Area Partnership, which certainly is beyond the Wampo boundaries. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Councilmember Clendenin. But we did not do this in a vacuum. We did a presentation for the transportation or the Public Transit Authority back in the spring as well. And again, we took a lot of information in. And so then a lot of the scenarios that we've come up with, certainly based on some of the technical information and the best practices, but also the community input that we were able to gather. So I do appreciate you bringing that up, Council Member.
If I could add, we tried very hard to put together something that was going to be, as Keith pointed out, bits and pieces of each of the 5 scenarios, knowing full well that everybody around this table represents a huge investment in infrastructure and what it's going to cost to maintain and preserve that infrastructure. So we were very careful to put in there that we need to really maintain and preserve what we have. But at the same time, we're going to be looking at some of the biggest changes since the end of World War II in terms of demographics, in terms of land use, housing, lifestyles, those kinds of things that we tried to kind of put a balance on what we've prepared and how it's going to impact this region for the next 20 years. And nobody knows at the end of 20 years, but we can build in elements in different phases into how this all fits together. But we know we have to preserve and maintain the infrastructure, but we know also that we have to prepare for the future and the changes. The inevitability and the probability of those changes is really great.
I think it was so hard to come up with an exact scenario because we were really trying to be flexible because of that point, Phil, that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And, maybe more than one scenario is the answer. And so, I wish I had a crystal ball, but maybe this bottle has the answers. I don't know.
Any other questions for Keith? You need a motion that we use this to provide guidance for the next MTP?
Bill?
It's the choice of the body. If you want us to go back and do some more considerations, we can do that as well.
And again, speaking on behalf of the scenario planning work group, we would hope that you all would be willing to make a recommendation to use this as the guidance for your planning. And if you're still need more information, because we have plenty of more information, we would be more than happy to continue a conversation. But again, on behalf of the scenario planning work group, we would certainly recommend that the policy body do adopt the representative scenarios as part of your planning for the next MTP.
I'd like to move that we incorporate the representative scenario as one of the elements to build the next MTP.
Motion, do we have a second?
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. As far as discussion, I want to thank Keith and the entire committee for doing all the work that they did on this. We're going to vote to adopt this, so I think they did a great job. I appreciate it. So, any other comments before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Looks like you got a plan. Thanks, Keith.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. And again, just one last time, I want to thank Chris and Tricia and all the Wampo staff for the great work they did for us. Thank you.
Next on our agenda, we've got Phil to talk about the Unified Planning Work Program.
Chair and members of the body. The UPA, or UPWP, the Unified Planning Work Program, is our primary budgeting document for the upcoming fiscal year. This is the second in a series of 3 UPWPs that's intended to kind of build the structure for the next MTP. So you'll see in the document that we used a lot of sub-activities that are kind of keys to and building blocks to the next Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And that plan is due in July of 2020. Anticipated expenditures, including our comprehensive planning grant funds and the use of a portion of the surface transportation funds, the remaining balance of the planning walkable places funds and transit funds are anticipated at $2,548,213. This is compared to $3,483,279 in programmed expenditures in 2018. And the majority of that is because we've had significant expenditures in the Planning Walkable Places Fund. CPG expenditures are programmed at $1,143,036, and that's compared to $1,046,922 in 2018. And one of the biggest reasons we're doing that is we're including $35,000 for outside accounting services since the city of Wichita recently informed us that they will no longer assist us in planning or in accounting functions, but the city will continue to act as Wampo's fiscal agent. The city is switching over to a new software is one of the reasons. I don't know exact time frames, but that was one of the reasons. Budget also includes a 1% cost of living adjustment and a possible 1.5% merit increase for Wampo personnel. That's based on work product and activities that are adjacent to or comply with the work that we do. In order to complete the freight plan update, the regional transit plan that was started in 2018, the budget also includes the use of $399,000 in surface transportation funds, and that's part of the $12 million that's set aside for construction projects. But we're thinking there's probably going to be some unobligated funds at the end of the year. Budget also indicates expenditures of $863,177 to complete the remainder of the ongoing planning walkable places projects that were started during this year. Federal funds account for approximately 80% of the total budget. Matching funds, the Wampo share comes from membership dues, tip fees, and cash carryover from non-federal Wampo funds. Document tries to anticipate possible changes in funding sources that might include uncertainties of federal and state funds and current levels and matching ratios. In other words, we're trying to do our best to program our funds that meet the highest level of needs within the resources that we have today. Document also includes sub-activities that examine how member communities might take advantage of the anticipated increase in freight. We're looking at 45 to 60% anticipated increases in freight movements and how local communities might take advantage of that increase in freight. Document also proposes to conduct surveys of different age groups that use transportation modes and try to get an idea of what their preferences are going to be, and in some cases what they're willing to pay for. Document also includes planning activities to study how smart or smarter transportation-related changes might impact our current infrastructure. Cars are getting a lot smarter. Trucks are getting a lot smarter. Walmart has ordered 180 Tesla electric vehicles, and those should be on the road probably within the next couple of years. So we're going to need to have ways we can communicate with those vehicles. The upcoming MTP is a 20-year document that should show at least the potential for change and how those changes might impact the positive and negative impacts of transportation choices. And again, this is the second and third year, a series of 3 UPWPs that will help build that MTP document. Your options are to approve the 2019 Unified Planning Work Program as submitted, or you could approve the 2019 Unified Planning Work Program with specific changes, or you could not approve the work program. We're asking for your approval of the document as submitted. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Bill? Well, then I make a motion that we approve the 2019 Unified Planning Work Program as submitted.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Thank you. Now we can all get paid.
Thanks, Bill. Next item we have ozone. Chris.
Thank you. So first up, I have a quick update on our 2018 ozone season. Then we'll get to the real fun stuff. So our 2018 ozone season came to an end on October 31st, and we have some preliminary data from it. Kansas Department of Health and Environment would probably want me to emphasize that this data has not gone through their QA/QC process, but we usually don't see any big changes in the results from that process. So these are probably pretty solid. As you can see here, we are up just a tick from what we've seen in previous years. We're in the mid 60 parts per billion range. For context, the federal standard is 70 parts per billion, so we are comfortably under that standard. You can see here, looking over the past most of the decade, we were at a much higher level earlier in the decade, up in the mid to upper 70s, and have seen a decline since then, but that decline does seem to be leveling out in about the mid 60s, maybe just a slight tick up in this most recent 3-year period. We are probably in pretty good shape based on the current standard. We're unlikely to be designated a non-attainment area. We do have a bit of leeway there. Where we could potentially be in trouble is if the EPA, the next time they reevaluate this standard in around 2020, were to lower it. They would probably lower it to either 65 or 60 parts per billion if they chose to make the standard more strict. Then we would really be on the bubble. But as long as the standard stays where it is, we're doing pretty good right now. So that is my brief update on ozone. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Chris? I guess my biggest question is, down in Peck, we have no control over that whatsoever, do we? What can we do to
No,
lower it?
and the city of Wichita actually did funded some modeling of where the ozone in our region comes from, essentially. And by far the biggest component is transport from outside of our region. And the sensor in Peck in particular tends to pick that up, since most of that transport is coming up from the south. So we are, in some sense, at the mercy of what stuff outside of our region is doing. Folks down there in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and Dallas. There is some local component, but it's the minority.
Second question is, the Wichita one is right beside 135. Is that the best place to sample the air, is right next to a major freeway?
Well, with ozone, it's fundamentally sort of non-local. You don't actually have ozone coming out of the tailpipes of vehicles, for instance. The way we get ozone is it's a combination of those tailpipe emissions and emissions from things like fueling up gasoline, where you get these volatile chemicals evaporating out of the gasoline at fueling stations or dry cleaners or that sort of thing. And they have to combine. So you don't find local hot spots near industrial areas or freeways the way you would with, say, particulate pollution. So as long as we're talking about ozone, we wouldn't expect anomalously high readings based on where that sensor is at the health department.
Very good.
I'd just like to make a comment. One of them's over at KU, but the other two, one's in Sedgwick and one's in Peck. So they're more rural, so. And they're the ones that go off. So the KU one doesn't.
Sedgwick one, I can see that we might have an impact on that one. Any other questions? Very good. We need any action?
Not on this one.
Very good. All right. If I see nothing else on this issue, and you're still up.
I'm still up there. Talk to you about performance measures. This is part of our performance-based planning process. That's where we measure performance based on our goals and use the results to inform future planning. Now, there's really two sets of goals and two sets of performance measures we talk about here. There are our local goals that are based, and the performance measure is based on those goals. They're part of our last long-range plan, Move 2040. And then there are national goals and performance measures that FHWA has crafted based on those national goals. Today I'm here to talk to you about that second category. These are federal performance measures that come to us from the Federal Highway Administration. And we've got 3 different areas we're going to talk about today. System performance, which is basically congestion, pavement condition, and bridge condition. So for system performance, we have 3 performance measures from these federal standards. The percentage of person miles traveled on the interstate system that are reliable, the percentage of person miles on the non-interstate national highway system that are reliable, and then a truck travel time reliability index. So these first 2 are basically calculated the same way, just for 2 different sets of roadways. We're looking at what is the 80th percentile speed compared to the 50th percentile speed. So you can think about that as being the speed on the worst day of the week on a set of roadways compared to the average speed, and how much worse are you? And if you're more than 50% worse, then that segment is not reliable. If you're less than 50% worse, it's considered reliable. So we're applying this to two different sets of roadways. One is the interstate system, pretty self-explanatory. In our region, that's 35, 135, 235. The other is the non-interstate NHS, the non-interstate national highway system. These are the most important roadways in our region other than the interstates. So for us, that's US 54, K15, K96, K254, and Southeast and Southwest boulevards. And that's based on our functional classification system. So we look at the segments on the interstates or on these non-interstate roads, see if they're reliable based on that criteria I talked about, and then we weight it based on the amount of vehicles and people traveling on each segment of those roads. So something like 135 through central Wichita gets more weight than a piece of these roadways that has a lower volume of traffic on it. So as probably should not come as a huge surprise based on what we've talked about before, our roadway system is pretty reliable. You can see we're flitting around 98, 99, in some cases 100% reliability in our region on the interstates. Now, if we were to map this, you can see the one area where we are sometimes not reliable is up there at the North Junction. I don't think that comes as a huge surprise to anyone here. You also see a tiny bit down there by the toll plaza to 135 at the south end. And that's probably going to stick around there until KTA implements open road tolling. That's just the toll facility there that's causing that. Similarly, when we look at these blue highways, the major non-interstate highways, we're up there 98, 99%. You will notice while there's not much darker yellow on there, there is some of sort of the light green. That's stuff that is below that 1.5 threshold, but higher than the darker green stuff. And you can see most of those, K15, Southeast Boulevard, Southwest Boulevard, and the surface portion of Kellogg. Most of those are streets with traffic lights on them, and those are just fundamentally going to be a little less reliable than your limited access highways are. So finally, the truck travel time reliability. This is just a metric for the interstate, and it's calculated a little bit differently. Rather than having a fixed threshold, we're just looking at how much less reliable is it during those non-reliable times. And there's actually a much stricter standard here. Here, rather than looking at the 20% unreliable times, the worst day of the week, we're looking at the 5% of worst times, the 95th percentile. Think of that as being like the worst day of the month. And FHWA's justification for this is essentially with just-in-time freight deliveries, that sort of thing, that there is a greater need for reliability on the freight side. So here we're seeing that even looking at that worst 5% of the time, it only takes about 20% longer to get through the average road segment in our region, hovering around 1.2 there. And here we can see, because of this stricter standard, we do see some more areas of color on this map. Again, the North Junction, no surprise. Some down at the toll plaza. We're also seeing another sort of darker area over there at the 235 and Kellogg interchange. Now keep in mind this is for 2017, so during that time period we did have the construction ongoing there. We are approaching the end of that long project, right, Tom? Light at the end of the tunnel? And hopefully, once the construction ends and we do have all of the new facilities out there open, I'm kind of hoping that disappears, or at least gets better once the construction is done out there. So part of the reason we're here today is we need to adopt targets for this. That's one of the things we've been mandated to do by the federal government. And the targets that staff and the Transportation Advisory Committee are proposing are 98% reliable for both the interstate and the non-interstate NHS, which is quite a high target, but it's in line with the performance that we see in our region. And then a truck travel time reliability of 1.25%. So even during those, 1.25. So even those worst 5% of the times, that worst day of the month, we're only looking at travel times that are about 25% longer. So before I go on to our pavement section, questions on the congestion portion of this? All right, pavement condition, I'm sure a subject everyone here is fascinated by. Here we've got 4 performance measures, and they're paired up. Essentially, we're looking at the percentage of pavement on the interstates in good condition, the percentage in poor condition, the percentage of that non-interstate national highway system that's in good condition, and the percentage in poor condition. And the way we get this data is KDOT has a van with a bunch of video cameras and laser sensors in it that they drive around every year and looks at how rough the pavement surface is, looks for cracks, looks for gaps between pieces of concrete, anything that would diminish the ride when you're driving on that pavement. Now, KDOT has been doing this sort of data collection for many years, but they've had to change the way they calculate some of this to meet the new federal regulations. So we only have about 2 years of data for our region. And KDOT has asked me to emphasize that because they were sort of still getting used to these new procedures for calculating this, that differences between the 2016 data and the 2017 data may be due to sort of their processes on their end rather than actual changes in the roadway. So don't read a whole lot into whether this particular number is going up or down by a few percentage points. That's probably an artifact of how the data was collected. But in general, we've got about 60% of the interstate pavement in our region in good condition, and around 1% or less than 1% in poor condition. Now, because we've only got the 2 years of data, I'm going to show you some statewide data for context here. Statewide, the pavement condition is a bit better. They're sort of up in the mid-60s versus here in the Wampo region, we're kind of in the around 60%. And then for the poor condition, they're under 1%, about where we are. And this is not entirely unexpected. Generally, it's harder to keep pavements in the best possible condition in urban areas, just because of the higher amount of use, higher traffic that these urban pavements see compared to some more rural areas. Now, the other thing to notice on here, if you see those red and green crosses, is those are the targets that KDOT has set. And you'll notice that in both cases, the targets are worse than the current level of performance. So their current level of performance is sort of in the upper 60s for pavement condition. They're setting a target at 65%. For the pavement in poor condition, they're right around 0.5%, or less than 0.5%, and they're setting targets at about 0.5%. So this is some combination of KDOT being conservative in their target setting, and potentially KDOT expecting that with their current level of funding, the pavement condition is going to get worse between now and 2020 and 2022 when these targets are being set for. So looking at the non-interstate NHS, those blue roadways, we're doing about the same in terms of pavement in good condition, around 60%. Pavement in poor condition, a little higher, about 3% versus the 1%-ish that we saw on the interstate side. KDOT, kind of the same thing. They're in the lower 60s with their good condition statewide, and about 1% for their good condition or for their poor condition statewide. Again, they're setting conservative or declining targets for both of these, expecting about 55% in good condition and about 1.5% in poor condition. Now, when the time came for staff to recommend targets for pavement condition, we talked to some folks, including Jim Weber, Paul Gunzelman, some of our other folks on the technical side of things, Ann Stevens. And there was a very strong feeling among these folks that we should not be setting targets for the Wampo region that sort of imply we're willing to accept worse conditions than KDOT is for the state as a whole. So stepping back a moment, when you set targets, the way we have set most of the targets for the Wampo region is to try and set the targets in line with our current performance. But there's also an option when you're setting targets to set targets for the performance that you would like to see. We're sort of sending a message in where we set these targets for, frankly, how we would like KDOT to maintain the roads in our region, since the vast majority of the roads we're looking at for these federal standards are KDOT highways. Now, that does mean that probably when 2022 comes around and these targets come up, that unless KDOT puts a whole bunch more into maintenance in our region, we're probably not going to meet the targets if you adopt the ones that the staff and TAC have recommended here. Now, there's no direct consequences for Wampo if we don't meet these targets. There's no federal money that's going to get taken away from us or anything like that. But Wampo will have to publish something in our next long-range plan update in 2025 that says, no, we're not meeting the targets we set for these regions. And we can explain why and why we set these targets. But it is important that you understand that when you're deciding whether or not to adopt these particular targets. So all that said, these are essentially identical to the KDOT statewide targets. 65% in good condition and no more than 0.5% in poor condition for the interstates, 55 and in good condition and no more than 0.15 in poor condition for the non-interstate NHS. So questions on pavements? Last up, bridge condition. Now, a couple things that are different here. One is, on my map, I only have blue highways because we are not dividing the interstates and the non-interstate NHS. We're essentially looking at our entire network of major highways, the full national highway system in our region. So all of the interstates and those major KDOT highways in the Wampo planning area. And we're looking at the condition of these bridges, the percentage in good condition, the percentage in poor condition. There's some weighting by deck area, so your large bridges count more than smaller ones. Other difference here is we have a lot more data. This is part of data from the National Bridge Inventory. I've got it graphed here going back all the way to 2002. So we have a lot more to work with in predicting where this is going. And as you can see, the story is essentially we were doing pretty good up until the recession hit. And then with fewer resources to put into bridges, we saw a decline going from about the lower 80s to the upper 70s. And that's kind of where we've leveled out for the moment, is right around 76% in good condition. Poor condition, the data is a bit noisier, it bounces around some. We've always been in the 0.5% to 2% range. So again, looking at the KDOT numbers for comparison, you can kind of see the same story there, this decline. And again, they're setting targets that are conservative or assuming that bridge condition is going to decline. They're setting a target of 70% good and no more than 3% poor for the bridges statewide. Now, when we talked again to those folks on the technical side about setting targets for this measure, one of the things that was pointed out is that we have put a bunch of effort into bridge maintenance in the Wampo region in the past couple of years, and we'll have more effort going into bridge maintenance and bridge rehabilitation in the next couple of years, things like the Green Project up near the North Junction, for instance. So in this case, our technical folks pushed for a target that is fairly close to where we are currently performing. They're essentially betting that because we're putting this money into these bridges, that our bridge condition is not going to continue to decline. Right now, we're at 76%, and we're recommending a target of 75%. So essentially, we're hoping that we do, in fact, get good return on investment for this money that we, and really that KDOT, is putting into the bridges in our region. And then for bridges in poor condition, because that data is so noisy, we're just going with the statewide target of about 3% for the recommended target. So questions on bridge condition? Pete?
How many bridges were counted in this?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I can get you that number. It's quite a lot because, again, it is the whole national highway system, and they're looking at everything all the way down to culverts that touches that system. So it's definitely in the hundreds in the Wampo region.
Questions?
All right, so this is something we need action on. There's a federal deadline for us setting targets for these. So your options are to approve the proposed performance targets as recommended by staff and the Transportation Advisory Committee, to not approve them, or to approve them with specific changes.
Motion. I'm sorry.
So, particularly in the pavement, you said that there weren't ramifications of us setting those.
No, for MPOs, for these, and really for all of the federal performance measures, there is no, I should say, there are no concrete consequences for failing to meet one of our performance measures. There's no federal funding taken away or anything like that. There is kind of, we do have to announce our performance in 2022 when we're setting these targets for. We do have to essentially publish something saying this is where we set the target at, this is the level of performance that we actually achieved.
Questions? Don't see any other questions. Do we have a motion to either approve, not approve, or approve with specific changes? I have a motion to approve. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Looks like you have a target.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Next item, we're up to item 5A, is committee updates. If you hadn't noticed, I'm not Dan. So, we have not had our executive committee meeting yet this month. We have it Friday. Don't have a big update on our executive committee. One of the important things, though, that did happen here recently, I hope you all saw it on the news, and Tom was there. We had the governor down, we had Secretary Carlson down. Brian Fry was representing the mayor as he usually does, and that was a joke. Anyway, I was there, and they announced the first phase for the North Junction. So we were very, very pleased with that. The only downside of the whole thing is that won't fix the North Junction. It just sets us up to be able to fix the North Junction. So that's still a few years ahead. But so I don't have anything else since Dan's not here. So I'll turn it over to Tom. You got anything for TAC?
The only thing I got from the TAC is that we did a planning exercise, which I discussed a little bit earlier, and we did the ozone update. And that's the only significant thing, so.
Good. Thank you. And let's see, Tom, you're up next.
Well, my thunder's been stolen.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Both you and Chris
We're
mentioned the
just
Green
so happy
Project.
that happened that we can't hold it back.
That's all right. The Green Project is scheduled, we'll open the bids in January. We hope to have a signed contract in February and hopefully see work begin in March. That's a 3-year project with bridge replacements from Meridian to the North Junction, well, really to Broadway, on I-235, both north and southbound. So happy to get that one going, especially on the heels of wrapping up the Red Project, which is at I-235 and US 54. That project, as far as drivers are concerned, I think we could say that that project is essentially completed. We will see an occasional lane blockage, either for a punch list item, something that needs to be fixed, or regular maintenance. And then occasionally, possibly a ramp closure for similar situations, but nothing like what we have seen for the last 3 years. So we're very happy about that. The project will continue. It's scheduled to be finished in June of next year, and there are a number of items still going on. There's a bridge being painted from underneath. It will take a number of months. There is landscaping, trees, and grass seeding to be done, and fences to be built off of the highway. So we won't maybe notice those things, but the project does continue for a few more months that way. It has been suggested that we throw a big party And KDOT is typically not that kind of organization. We are very utilitarian, so unfortunately, we won't be throwing a party for drivers, but I think those drivers are very happy about it. And it's obvious that Chris lives not on the west side because he's not aware that for drivers, the project is essentially finished.
Very good. Thank you very much. Michael?
I have a short report, not quite as uplifting as Tom's, I guess. It's all good news, Tom. I guess I can report the Joint Legislative Transportation Task Force has completed their work. We are expecting a final report to be put together by the end of January. In the meantime, I have a two-page summary here that kind of, well, it summarizes some of the key points, some of the key things we heard through the task force process. I brought 40 copies. That should be enough for those around the table. Please feel free to take two.
Thank you. Richard?
Thank you. It's good to be back. It seems like it's been forever. It's been a number of months, so glad to finally rejoin you all. Have a couple of items to update. First off is a press release today from our Secretary of Transportation on build grants. Just had $1.5 billion awarded for that competition for grants that went out earlier this year. There were over 851 eligible applicants, and just over 90 were selected. In Kansas, we had 2 awardees. One was for the Turner Diagonal Project in Wyandotte County off of I-70 for $13.8 million, and then a project on Vine Street in Hayes for $6 million. So, but really healthy competition. If everyone had received money that they had applied for, it would have been over $10 billion. So, but we look to continue the build applications, build grants as we keep going forward. But so anyway, just wanted to let you all know, if you go to transportation.gov, you'll see the press release and a list of all the selected projects. So a number of other things. Wanted to kind of talk about leadership changes. In terms of federal highways, we still have Brandy Hendrickson as our deputy administrator. No word on selection of an actual administrator, but she's functioning great in the role. We do have a new executive director that came on board a couple weeks back, Tom Everett, who had been our Federal Highways chief engineer. So we're real pleased to have him selected. He's on board and going forward, but he brings strong health of the program and knowledge of everything going on. Here in Kansas, no changes, but we're happily working. So a couple of other things that went on. We had our EDC 5 initiative in St. Louis. That was at the end of October, and we had 3 new technologies that were selected. EDC is our Everyday Counts program, which is we're actually in our 5th round. This is a program every 2 years where Federal Highways comes out with types of technologies to advance that can make programs better. And in this state, one of the big focus areas that we're going to be looking at is reducing roadway departures, especially on local roads, minor collectors. That's a big issue we know here in the state. 2 other technologies that we're working with KDOT and others, and Wampo's part of our state Transportation Innovation Council is on geotechnical methods, as well as some 3D modeling of hydraulics. So what else do I have? That's about it, really. The other thing is on funding. We're under a continuing resolution. The last version ran out on December 7th, and we're on a 2-week extension. And with the new Congress coming on board, we're hopeful that we'll have some agreement towards something a little more substantive to carry us out through the rest of the year. Our federal fiscal year ends September 30th. But anyway, it's good to be back. Good to see that the UPWP was approved, and I'll be taking a look at that for approval soon. So any questions for me?
Okay, any questions? Well, thank you all very much. And also, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I know we had a full agenda because we didn't have a quorum last month, so we had a number of other things that we had to cover today. I appreciate everyone being here so that we could cover that. Is there any other business at all that needs to come before this board? If not, I want to wish everyone a very happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Enjoy your families during this sacred time. I appreciate everything that everyone did today. Make sure you tell Dan that even though we had 2 months worth of agenda, we finished in an hour and 20 minutes. With that, we're adjourned.